The canyon narrows into stone and heat, while the A-10C Thunderbolt II settles on a low run at roughly 100 feet above the ground. The GAU-8 begins as a deep roll that fills the ribs, and then the ridge coughs, rock dust and hard white impact flashes. Along the north face, firing points hide in shadow and then vanish under the roar. Inside the cockpit, the left MFCD carries the lightning infrared image, and the right shows navigation and weapons. HMCS cues place a steady symbol on the north ridge, while the HUD stays clean of thermal imagery. The fuel totalizer sits below Bingo at 2,300 pounds, and the low fuel caution light glows in the corner of her eye. JTAC Raven 21 issues a clear Type 3 control to engage the north ridge with friendlies on the roadway. Attack heading is 090 to 120. With an egress west in altitude, deconfliction is already in place. Major Aaron Hart absorbs the calls and keeps her breathing slow, hands light on the throttles and stick. She keys the mic long enough for in hot and then lets the gun speak. The nose settles, the pipper holds, and the ridge gives way in dust and splintered stone. Off and egress west comes smooth as a checklist, and then she leaves the transmitter cold to keep the quiet intact. The valley noise fades to the thrum of turbines and the thud of her heartbeat. She glances down, steadies her glove, and writes on the kneeboard in careful red letters. Ridge 1 cleared. Sunrise spills across the ramp and turns the A-10C into a slab of dull silver. Major Aaron Hart walks the jet in steady circles, eyes on panels, seams, and any sign of a leak. She kneels at the main gear and the GAU-8 housing, palms the metal, and notes dust on her gloves with a faint jet fuel smell. She climbs in and settles to the checklist. APU start, then engine start as the cockpit hums alive. MFCDs power up. The lightning pod initializes. HMCS aligns. Radios set. IFF verified. CMSP and CMSC checked. Weapon profiles loaded. And the gun remains safe until cleared. Ramp noise rises and fades like surf, while capped, Jake Turner and Lieutenant Cole Briggs trade easy jokes somewhere behind her. Aaron keeps her focus on the kneeboard, clips the card, and inks Joker fuel at 3,500 pounds and Bingo at 2,300 pounds. Her breathing stays slow as she runs eyes across engine instruments and hydraulic pressures. Chocks pull and she rolls, nose wheel light against the taxi line. At last chance, the crew chief steps up, respectful and crisp, as he addresses her as ma'am, and his team removes pins and signals the arming checks according to standard operating procedures. Master arm is set when cleared, safety's confirmed, and the jet feels ready in her hands. Silence settles inside the canopy while the ramp keeps its clatter. Brakes release and the A-10C eases forward with a smooth turn toward the runway. Aaron keeps small inputs on the throttles and stick as the morning light sharpens, and the ritual carries her into motion. Dust hangs in the briefing room while a projector throws a map across the wall. The narrow pass cuts the mountains like a thin scar, with a convoy route threaded through it. Lieutenant Cole Marcus Hale steps to the front and lays out priorities in a firm cadence that leaves little space for drift. Fuel discipline comes first, with planned altitudes to hold the overhead corridor. Aircrew are to wait for ground calls before any action and avoid unnecessary deviations that burn pounds for nothing. The words feel practiced, but the mission will live or die on that discipline. In the middle rows, capped Jake Turner and Lieutenant Cole Briggs trade offhand remarks that wave away faint heat plumes as harmless clutter. Their tone stays light enough to draw a few smirks, then fades back into the room's hum. The projector fan whirs louder than the scattered laughter. Near the back, Major Aaron Hart keeps her eyes on the map and her hands on a kneeboard. She writes grid references in red, steady and neat, then circles a segment of the North Ridge that has bothered her since earlier reports. Her notes grow into a small, private map that does not match the room's loud confidence. Hale closes the session with a final push to maintain the corridor and conserve fuel. Chairs scrape and voices rise as people stand and move for the door. Aaron stays a beat longer, presses one last underline beneath the North Ridge entry, and shuts the kneeboard like she is sealing quiet inside it. The tower sets a staggered launch while the ramp hums like a low tide. Major Aaron Hart waits in the final slot by deliberate assignment, nose pointed at the hold short line as the formation rolls one by one. Inside the canopy, the world narrows to instruments, breath, and the feel of the jet easing forward. She runs the last checks with a steady rhythm. Flight controls free and correct. Flaps set for departure. Trim, centered, and verified. Takeoff data reviewed. HUD symbology, clean and bright. Radios set for tower and departure. Master arms safe until cleared at the proper point. Taxi continues to last chance, and the jet pauses in the painted box. Ground crew arrive with crisp signals and remove safety pins, while a crew chief leans in with a respectful nod that says, "Ma'am," without breaking the flow. Arming is confirmed in the correct order, and the checklist catches each small detail before she releases the brakes again. She holds short as the second-to-last aircraft rotates and climbs into the pale morning. Ramp noise washes around the cockpit while her breathing stays calm and even. The nose wheel tracks the center line when she lines up. Power rolls in smoothly, and the jet answers with a steady surge. The runway falls away in a clean rotation, and the climb settles onto the brief departure. Callouts live in muscle memory rather than speech, as gear retracts and the departure path unfolds. Ahead, contrails already mark the sky, and Aaron lifts off last, steady and exact, carrying the quiet shape of last in without any need for fanfare. The flight settles into a vertical stack over the valley, each jet in its own altitude block, with timing offsets to stay clear. Major Aaron Hart holds the overhead corridor and watches fuel in pounds tick down at a measured pace. The radio carries easy chatter that rises and falls like wind against stone. She keeps her cockpit clean and methodical. An MFCD shows the lightning pod in infrared while the other screen carries navigation. HMCS gives quick cueing, and the HUD stays simple and free of thermal imagery. Aaron slews the sensor to the north ridge and lets the picture steady. A small pulse of heat flickers against rock and brush, just enough to earn attention. She sets a sensor point of interest and writes a grid on the kneeboard in red. Her update is brief and professional, just a heads up that heat is present near the ridge with no change to tasking. Command reminds the stack to hold the corridor and conserve fuel for the long wait. Aaron acknowledges and goes quiet again, hands light on the stick and throttles. The contrast sharpens as voices trade ramp-style bravado while her breathing stays slow and even. She trims for a lazy orbit and checks the totalizer, then resets the TGP to watch the same patch of stone. The anomaly remains unconfirmed. The team waits on ground calls, and she circles the red note twice as a private anchor before returning her eyes to the valley floor. The valley snaps hard from watch to contact as white trails leap from the north ridge and punch the lead truck. Fire blooms against rock, and the convoy stalls in a choke of dust. Major Aaron Hart steadies the jet and lets her breathing fall into a slow count. She narrows the lightning pod on the MFCD until the ridgeline fills the frame. Multiple flashes mark likely launch points, so she drops sensor points of interest in a clean string and writes precise grids in red on the kneeboard. The HUD stays clean while infrared lives only on the screen. Raven 21 comes up with a firm Type 3 control and danger close authorized by the ground commander. Attack headings are set between 090 and 120 with egress west, and the stack holds safety by altitude blocks and timing. Aaron reads back tight and sets her plan without waste. Across the net, other aircraft talk fuel and begin to peel for recovery. Pounds are low and margins are thin, and their voices thin with it. Aaron notes her own fuel in pounds, resets her timer, and keeps the transmitter cold unless required. She slews back to the hottest cut of rock and refines the pipper cage with a small roll of her wrist. The MFCD shows a steady picture. The HMCS makes cueing quick, and her hands ride the throttles with the lightest touch. Checklists fade to muscle memory as the gun profile comes alive. The battlefield picture tightens into a clean approach to suppress multiple launch positions. The convoy remains pinned and needs space to move. Aaron lines up the first run, calls in hot in clipped brevity, and lets the canyon narrow into a single, disciplined task. Command guidance shifts to conservation and regrouping as the net fills with calm notices about fuel states and recoveries. Jets peel from the stack in tidy turns that leave pale crescents on the sky. The valley feels wider for a moment, then tightens again around the stalled convoy. Major Earnhardt checks the totalizer and notes pounds edging toward the line she set on the kneeboard. Joker was 3.5 thousand pounds earlier, and Bingo sits at 2.3 thousand pounds. She resets her internal clock and keeps her breathing even. She coordinates a final window with Raven 21 under an active Type 3 control, with danger close already cleared by the ground commander. Attack heading is set between 090 and 120 with an egress west. Altitude blocks remain deconflicted, and spacing stays clean. Readbacks are short, exact, and done without flourish. Master arm logic is correct for the pass, then safe for the climb out. HMCS gives quick cueing while the Lightning Pod holds the picture steady on an MFCD. The HUD stays clean and simple, free of thermal imagery, and her hands rest light on the throttles and stick. Across the net, fuel calls taper as more aircraft commit to recovery. Aaron keeps the transmitter cold unless required, adds one small trim touch, and watches the ridgeline settle into the sight picture. She commits to remain on station for a few more minutes to cover the convoy while the formation thins, and the silence motif tightens around her as the valley waits. The nose drops into the valley and the world narrows to rock and air. Major Earnhardt rolls to an east to west, heading between 090 and 120, under a firm Type 3 control with danger close already cleared by the ground commander. An MFCD carries the Lightning Pod and infrared, while the other screen holds navigation. HMCS cueing snaps her eyes to the north ridge, and the HUD stays clean of thermal imagery. She confirms the sensor point of interest on the hottest cut of stone. Master arm logic is set correctly, and the pipper settles with a small squeeze on the trim hat. Her breathing stays even as throttles slide forward. She calls in hot and crisp brevity, and the jet rides the line at roughly 100 to 150 feet above ground level. The GAU-8 speaks in a deep rolling note that fills the canyon. Rock dust kicks high and hard, and impact flashes crawl the ridge where the firing points hide. She eases out of the dive and keeps the egress west, just as briefed. The transmit key touches once for off safe, and the climb is steady back to the altitude block. Raven confirms good effects while the convoy inches its nose around the burned lead. Aaron resets the pod video to verify no new launches and keeps the HUD uncluttered. Fuel clicks near 2.6 thousand pounds, and her kneeboard carries the math with Bingo, still at 2.3 thousand. She marks Ridge 1 cleared in red ink and brackets the time block in the margin. The valley holds its breath as she resets, switches, and checks the master arm. Calm rides in her hands as the jet turns back toward the ridge for what comes next. The jet settles into the run as the valley tightens. Major Earnhardt rolls to an east to west, heading between 090 and 120, cleared under active Type 3 control with danger close in effect. She keeps the egress west in her mind before the nose drops. An MFCD shows the Lightning Pod and infrared, while the other screen holds navigation. HMCS cueing snaps her eyes to the next firing point on the north ridge. The HUD stays clean and simple without thermal imagery. She confirms friendlies remain on the roadway and selects an offset that keeps the pipper outside their lane. Kneeboard notes in red line up with the grid she marked earlier. Her breathing is slow as the throttles move a fraction forward. In hot lives on the radio, in crisp brevity as the cannon speaks. The GAU-8 rolls deep and low, and the ridge answers with rock dust and hard impact flashes. She rides the line around 100 to 150 feet above ground level and keeps hands light on the stick. Off dry or off safe is called as she climbs back toward the block. Egress west stays clean and the picture resets quickly on the MFCD. The convoy inches forward by a truck length and the valley feels a touch wider. Fuel trends toward the line, with pounds approaching 2.3 thousand. She tells Raven 21 she has time for one more window before recovery and checks master arm logic again. She writes Ridge 2 degraded in red, turns back to the ridge, and lets her breathing set the beat that the convoy follows. The caution light blinks alive as fuel hits bingo at 2.3 thousand pounds. The totalizer slides near 2.1 thousand and holds there for a breath. Major Aaron Hart lets the numbers settle and keeps her breathing even. Engine instruments sit within limits. Temperatures and pressures are steady and the hydraulics read clean. She takes the narrow window the jet offers. An MFCD shows the lightning pod and infrared, while the other screen holds navigation. HMCS queuing pulls her eyes to the North Ridge, and the HUD stays clean without thermal imagery. She cages and uncages the Pipper until it feels locked in place. Raven 21 keeps Type 3 control active, with danger close already cleared by the ground commander. Aaron plans an east-to-west attack between 090 and 120 with an egress west. Altitude will live around 100 to 150 feet above ground level. She checks master arm logic and confirms switches by habit. In hot lives on the net as a simple marker, and the jet drops into the groove. The GAU-8 rolls out its deep note and the ridge answers with rock dust and hard impact flashes. Off-safe comes as the nose rises, and the egress west unfolds exactly as briefed. The convoy edges forward, and drivers line up to push the choke point. Fuel ticks lower, but the picture looks clean. She scans the instruments again and sees only steady needles. The stack is almost gone, and the valley grows quiet. Calm fills the cockpit while her hands make only small inputs. The choke point sits suppressed, and the road opens. Aaron commits to immediate recovery and turns the nose for home. On the kneeboard, a red line records fuel and effects as she eases the throttles back for the climb. The valley narrows to a tunnel of rock as Major Aaron Hart sets up the final run. Type 3 control is active from Raven 21, with danger close already cleared by the ground commander. She selects an east-to-west attack, heading between 090 and 120, and keeps egress west fixed in her mind. Altitude will ride about 100 to 150 feet above ground level to keep the Pipper steady and the angles clean. An MFCD carries the lightning pod video, while the other screen holds navigation. HMCS queuing snaps her view to the hottest cut of the North Ridge, and the HUD stays clean without thermal imagery. She confirms friendlies remain on the roadway and picks an offset that keeps the Pipper outside their lane. Master arm logic is correct, and her squeeze is disciplined and brief. The GAU-8 rolls out a deep sound that shakes the canyon floor. Rock dust boils and hard impact flashes walk the ridge where the last firing points hide. Off-safe rides on the climb as she holds the egress west exactly as briefed. Raven confirms good effects and last vehicle clear, while her hands relax a fraction on the throttles. Fuel sits near 1.7 thousand pounds, well below bingo, and the decision to recover is immediate. Engine instruments stay within limits, and the picture is quieting. She steadies her breathing and lets the radios fade to a low murmur. The stack is thin, and the valley finally exhales. On the kneeboard, she writes a red note that the choke point is open and adds a quick fuel mark. The transmitter stays cold, and the quiet authority of the moment settles over stone and smoke as she turns for home. Major Aaron Hart climbs out to the west and lets the ridge drop beneath the wing. Fuel sits near 1.7 thousand pounds and trends lower with each breath. Throttle comes back to a best range setting, and the climb smooths toward an efficient altitude. Engine instruments, hydraulics, and caution lights get a steady scan that never hurries. An MFCD clears to navigation while the other page shows a simple systems view. The lightning pod is stowed, checks complete, and the cockpit feels clean again. She passes a brief return to base status call, and then lets the transmitter go cold. Planning fills the quiet as she sketches recovery in her head without extra words. Countermeasures are safe, oxygen is good, and navigation confirms a direct line to home with margin to spare. HMCS remains available for queuing if needed, and the HUD stays uncluttered with no thermal imagery. The valley slips behind, and the convoy finally moves with space between trucks. The formation has thinned to nothing, and the sky feels wider than it did a minute ago. She trims for the climb and watches fuel tick down in even steps. Temperatures and pressures hold steady, and the aircraft rides true in light air. Arrival builds in her mind with pattern altitude, spacing, and a clean descent planned before the field comes into view. She rehearses the flow until each step lands in order. On the kneeboard, she draws a red line for fuel state and a short note on effects. The numbers are plain and the handwriting is calm. Erin commits to a careful recovery that respects the margins she fought to keep. The jet hums a steady tone, and the horizon opens toward home. Cloud breaks give the field a soft edge, as Major Erin Hart sets up the overhead pattern. Speeds are on profile, and spacing looks clean across the final turn. The descent eases into place like a practiced breath. She configures early and without rush. Gear comes down, flaps set, and the speed brakes crack just enough to settle the glide. Anti-skid waits for the runway like a quiet promise. The cockpit is tidy and correct. The lightning pod is stowed. MFCDs ride on navigation pages. HMCS remains available, and the HUD shows only what she needs. Countermeasures are safe, and IFF goes to standby when cleared. Touchdown feels firm and true, with the jet tracking the centerline under a steady hand. She lets the speed bleed, raises the boards as required, and takes a midfield exit. At the end of runway, the ground crew insert safety pins and confirm the gun and stores are safe before she taxis on. Ramp lights shine against dull paint while radios flow in the background without drama. She follows the marshaller to the spot and slides the throttles to idle. Parking brake goes set and the flow begins. Throttles move to cutoff and the engines wind down in an even fade. APU comes on as needed for clean power, then off when the checks are complete. Oxygen off, battery off, canopy open, and the day breathes in. She pauses with the kneeboard in her lap and reads the red lines that mark fuel and effects. The ramp noise feels softer now, like the end of a long sentence. Erin steps down to concrete with quiet shoulders and leaves the jet resting in the light. Operations is quiet when Major Erin Hart walks in with her helmet bag. A timeline of the troops in contact sits on the screen with time marks and short notes. She hands the crew a drive with lightning pod video and gun footage. Forms for mission data slide across a table and she signs where needed. Weapon status is confirmed clean with gun safe and stores saved on recovery. The maintainer note logs are cross-checked against her aircraft number. Lieutenant Cole Marcus Hale stands at the board and writes a single line that reads, "Single A-10 provided CAS." No extra flourish follows, and the marker squeaks once before he caps it. Target locations are reviewed by grid with the North Ridge blocks listed in order. Attack headings and egress west are matched to each pass against the timeline. Danger close authorization is documented as granted by the ground commander through Raven 21. Battle damage assessment is recorded as suppressed or destroyed, per JTAC confirmation. Erin updates her kneeboard for archive and adds fuel in pounds on landing. A short list notes passes, effects, and the moment the choke point opened, voices from other pilots stay low and practical as they check their own lines. The room sounds like paper and cloth and a projector fan that never changes pitch. She finishes the admin and clips the kneeboard shut with a neat motion. The red ink looks darker under the fluorescent light. The official record remains plain and precise on the board. The weight of the mission sits instead in the margins she carries out of the room. Harsh fluorescent light turns the cafeteria into a pale box of metal and tile. Major Erin Hart sits alone at a corner table while low conversation hums in clusters a few seats away. Her tray holds the kind of meal that fills more than it pleases. The kneeboard rests beside it with a faint red smear where the pen dragged across a line. Airman First Class Noah Reed walks up in clean coveralls that still carry the ramp smell. He asks if she stayed on station past bingo fuel and offers a simple thanks, using Mom with care and without ceremony. Erin answers with a single nod and returns to her food. The kneeboard edges closer to her elbow like a quiet witness. For a breath, the room noise dips, then rises again into the usual clatter of trays and chairs. Stories tend to move best from tool carts to tables, carried by short phrases and wide eyes. Across the room, a few maintainers lean in and share the two words they have started to repeat. Last in feels different on their tongues now, softer and heavier at the same time. Erin keeps eating while the rhythm of the room settles around her. The fluorescent hum sounds almost like the ramp at idle. She finishes the meal and stands, tucks the kneeboard under her arm, and straightens her shoulders. Reed watches her go with a thoughtful look that lingers after she turns the corner. The cafeteria returns to its ordinary pace. The story does not, because it lives where official lines never quite reach. Dusk settles over the flight line while open hangar doors glow like warm squares against the dim. Crew chiefs work in slow wise, practiced motions, and the A-10C sits quiet on chocks, with the day finally off its skin. The ramp smells like fuel and dust, turning cool. Safety pins are in place along pylons and gear. Intake covers and the gun cover are fitted tight, and chalk marks on a clipboard show the aircraft logged for the night. Tools click softly and then stop. The nickname moves on, low voices near tool carts and wing shadows. Last in is not a jab anymore. It sounds like a nod that people pass along without looking around. Major Erin Hart walks to a small locker by the maintenance bench and slides her kneeboard onto the shelf. The red note that reads, "Anomaly Deliberate," shows for a breath before the door closes. It feels like a page being pressed flat. She pauses at the edge of the ramp and listens to a turbine echo fading from a far departure. The sky holds a thin line of color above the roofs and then lets it go. She turns for the path that leads away from the noise. Inside the hangar, a staff sergeant signs the forms that finish the day. A senior airman coils a cord and says nothing. The jet keeps its shape in the half-light, like a promise kept. The evening folds in with no ceremony at all. Discipline and silence seem to carry farther than praise when the doors roll down. Sometimes, the pilot who lifts off last is the one who clears the way first.